In this video, we're going to take a look at queues and priority queues. So what's a queue? If you were from Great Britain, you would immediately know what a queue is. A queue is a line. A queue is the turnstiles that you see when you go to Cedar Point. People come in one end of the queue and they go out the other end, and the first person in to the queue, the first person into the line, is the first person that comes out the other end and gets to ride the ride. So a queue is a first in, first out, or FIFO, F-I-F-O, first in or first out data structure. Elements are added onto the end of the queue. You get in line at Cedar Point, you're on the end of the queue, and the people up front are removed from the beginning of the queue. So that's how I like to think of a queue. We add things onto the end, pull things off of the front. Okay. In a priority queue, some of those elements are assigned priorities, and I like to think of that as the fast pass. We've all been to, if you've been to Cedar Point in the last 5 to 10 years, you know that there's the fast pass now, and some people get priority boarding. They pay extra money so that they can jump to the head of the line because they have a priority boarding pass. And that's the only difference between them. First in, first out, although in a priority queue, the highest priority gets to come out first. So let's take a look at some of the methods that are built in. Again, you can create queues using array lists now, using other structures. So a lot of the times I like, especially for new people learning this, to think about these and compare them to the things they already understand about array lists. But they're not the same. They are not the same. Queues specialize in what they do. The other thing you might think about is a print queue. As people print to a printer, it goes to a print queue, and the first job that comes in is the first job that comes out of the printer, which is where the name comes from, for print queue. So look at some of the methods we have here for a queue that come from the queue interface. We have an offer method, which inserts whatever element we put in the parentheses. It adds it onto the queue. It's adding something onto the end of the line. Okay. We have a pull method, which retrieves and removes the head of the queue, or it gives a null if the queue is empty. If there's nobody in there, it gives a null. So we can pull the queue to pull the queue to get the item off the head of the line. Okay. We can also do a remove. A remove also retrieves and removes the head of the queue. The difference between pull and remove is that if we remove it and there's nothing there, we'll throw an exception. So if the queue is empty, remove will throw an exception, and pull will actually just return a null value. Okay. Then we have peek. So that retrieves but does not remove the head of the queue. So that's like looking to see who's next in the line, right? We go back to our Cedar Point reference. Hey, let's peek to see who's at the front of the line now. So it retrieves but doesn't remove the head of the queue. And it also returns a null if the queue is empty. And then we have element, which retrieves but does not remove the head of the queue. But this one will throw an exception if the queue is empty. Sometimes we want to throw exceptions. Sometimes we don't want to throw exceptions. I shouldn't say we want to throw exceptions. We want to allow the exception to happen so we can catch it and do things with it. And sometimes we don't. So sometimes we want to peek at something before we try to remove it. Peek to make sure it's there and then remove it maybe. Might be a way to think of that. So that's how a queue works. It's still a specialized kind of list. Things that go in first are the things that come out first. If we look at using a linked list for a queue, linked list can be a queue, and as we know, an array list could also implement all those, not using the same names though. We also have a deck, which works just the opposite of a queue. Sometimes people look at that and say DQ, but usually it's called a deck. But they all come from the collections interface. Here's the priority queue class. You can see some of its methods to create a default priority queue, create a default priority queue with initial capacity. If you just do it empty, it creates a capacity of 11. We can take any collection and turn it into a priority queue. That's all I'm going to say about priority queues. Learning the difference between lists, stacks, and queues, they all work very similarly in that it's an ordered list of some kind, whether you're taking it off the beginning, putting it on the end, taking it off the end. Those are the differences between them, and they all kind of function the same. I shouldn't say that. They don't all function the same, but the concept works the same. And we just make adjustments for whether things are going on the end, coming off the beginning, getting inserted in the middle, and we have to choose the correct one for our application to make it efficient.